Loving your neighbor. Loving, as I said, loving across generations, building bridges in the family of God. Now, I will say this at the onset. We wish that it were not so, but the fact of the matter is there can be a generational challenge in the Lord's church. It does exist in most every other area of life, but it can certainly present challenges in the Lord's church. Every generation, has their strengths. Every generation also has its blind spots. You see, in most churches today, I think we can really break it down and say there are at least 4 generations worshiping together. There are the older saints. That's most of what this class is, most of. With decades of faith. You also have a middle-aged group of believers carrying oftentimes a lot of the leadership responsibilities. We do have our young adults who are in this time of life where they're forming their identity and their conviction to God. And then we have our young people who are learning the faith. Now, this is not a weakness that we have such a diversity in the church. It's actually a gift from God. But the thing we have to understand is as we kind of get into this idea of generational loving thy neighbor, right? This neighbor love that is generational. We understand that it requires intentional love. And without effort on our part, on their part, the differences that we have generationally become tension between us. With love and with God's help, they become strength. Neighbor love includes people older than us and people younger than us. And I believe that God's plan has always been generational. In Psalm 145 and verse 4, one generation shall commend your works, what? To another. Right? Faith was never designed to exist in an isolated age group. I believe God's plan was that of what we would say transmission. Older believers testify and younger believers receive and continue the story. The issue is, the struggle is for you and me is that when this breaks down, when this generational gap, when that bridge is broken, then what we end up seeing is that faith begins to weaken. I think every generation, if you think back, you've probably heard it over the years, when you were much, much, much younger. And then when you were that next stage of life. And then in this generation now, every generation faces the temptation to say, things were better in my day, right? Or on the other side, it means they don't understand how things work now. So you see, there are two sides of that. But we have to understand that Scripture calls for generations to work as a partnership, not in competition with one another. I believe the church will thrive, and it does thrive, when experience meets energy. Turn to the book of Titus. We're going to read verses 1 through 8 of chapter 2. Titus 2, 1 through 8. This is going to be God's blueprint for the type of discipleship that is intergenerational. Okay? Who can read that for me? Verses 1 through 8 of Titus 2. All right, Johnny.
But as to you, speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine, that the older men be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith, in love, in patience. Older women likewise.
Thank you. So what Paul here is doing is he's instructing Titus to organize the church around organization or generational mentorship. Okay? First of all, says the older men, teach the younger men. Okay? Now, as we're going through these, Paul's instruction to Titus is also Paul's instruction to us. Yeah? So when he's talking about this instruction between the older men to the younger men, that's a responsibility that falls on us in this room today. We have the responsibility to step up and to teach the younger men. Not just by our example, but certainly first and foremost, but by the investment of our time, by the investment of our prayers, by the investment of our encouragement. We have that responsibility. We are called by God to create this legacy that will continue, right? Because, very soon this weekend, we're going to be talking in our homecoming some stories. People will be sharing stories. There's going to be a table out with a bunch of pictures on it throughout the years, and you're going to see stories. And, I've been associated with Azalea City at the very beginning in 1991. But there are folks that have been a part of it a whole lot longer than me. And they can remind you, I remember I was this big, and brother so-and-so was the elder, and this guy was the preacher. I remember when we did this, and here we are in 2026. The legacy of those pillars of faith is what is the Azalea City Church of Christ now. And by and large, at least from the male perspective, it is because the older men taught the younger men. We cannot fail our younger men in this generation. This has got to be critically important to us, that we are creating this legacy of that maybe another 75 years from now. It'll be the 150th year if the Lord doesn't come back first, of the Azalea City Church of Christ. And they'll be looking at pictures on a table. And the young boys that we're teaching now are going to be the ones that will be the elders later, carrying on the same legacy. Likewise, older women teach the younger women. Historically, women have done a phenomenal job at this. And we understand that the different roles that men and women play in the Lord's church. But let it not be understated that the value that older women play in teaching our younger women, it's critical. It is critical to teach how to be that helper, that supporter, how to be a great woman of faith, a Proverbs 31 woman of faith, how to be that person who can grow up and maybe desire to be a Bible school teacher, who wants to be a godly woman to support a godly man, to help to, be that catalyst that holds things together so often in the church. We cannot fail our young women, our young girls. You see, the continuity is critical that we create here. So let's focus real quick on that role of older believers. Paul says that the older believers should be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in the faith. So, first of all, he's really kind of establishing the traits of godly Christian and what they need to be in order to be the example, in order to have those things that God would have us to exhibit so that we can be a proper teacher to the young people. Sober-minded, right? What is that really? That is making the serious things of life serious. Dignified, right? Somebody needs to be well respected. Somebody needs to carry themselves well. Someone that the young people will look up to and say, that's the kind of person that I want to be. Self-control, that's obvious. We have to be a person who is not, as Terry used to refer to himself, as a guy with an anger shark, right? We have to be, meekness has to be our mantra, right? Strength under control. And obviously, last but not least, we have to be sound in the faith. You can teach a young person how to be good morally. You can teach a person how to be respectful of their elders. But what we need to teach them most importantly is the truth of God. They need to be able to, in turn, as a legacy from us, be those that can be sound in the faith and teach the ways of God to the next generation. Now, we know this, age alone does not produce wisdom, but faithful years of walking in Christ create a kind of a reservoir of experience that young believers, I believe, desperately need. Because many of us have raised children, we understand that even though we may have a great reservoir of experience, those young people don't always value it, listen to it. You know, it goes back to that, they don't understand how we do things now, right? But we have this innate responsibility. We have this inherited responsibility as children of God, as older children of God, by our faithful years of walking with Christ, to take that and to pass it on. We give it away, so to speak. And then, of course, there is the role of that younger believer, right? Paul tells that younger believer to be self-controlled, right? That's a learned behavior. To be teachable, that's a struggle at times. And to be examples. We need to be teaching our young people that you're not too young to be the example that you need to be in your own home. I've known, when Samantha and I were working at Central, we would work with some kids who were the spiritual example in their home to their families. We need to teach that to our young people. Show them the value of self-control. Show them that they need to be teachable, and that will help them in all areas of their life. Now, the great thing is, youth brings a few things to the table. Energy, right? when we have our fellowship after class this morning, there's going to be some little ones running in between the tables at light speed. And how many of us have said, boy, if I could just bottle some of that up, hold on to some of that. Youth does have energy. Our role as the older ones, as the slower ones, is to help them learn how to channel that energy, how to use it for something that is good, that is godly. Second of all, the youth brings creativity. That is one that we need to make sure that we encourage, is that our young people continue to exhibit creativity, because they are teachers through their creativity, and they don't even know it. They also can bring a vision, right? This is where that rub can start to happen, to where the younger people bring a vision of change. Ooh, what a word, right? Of how things might need to morph or to develop. But they do bring vision. And that's something that is valuable that we need to recognize. And then lastly, they bring courage. It's kind of the same thing. You say, boy, when I was 18 years old, I thought I was 6 foot, and bulletproof, all that kind of thing. And that's just the nature of young people who are trying to figure out life, and they're moving. Listen, you could be in their 20s and 30s and still have that same type of mindset. Well, that can be a good thing, especially if you have older folks with the experience that can kind of help them. That word we've used a few times, guardrails, right? Kind of help them with the guardrails, avoiding cliffs that they don't realize how close they are to. It works. It works together. It's a partnership. The church needs both wisdom and enthusiasm and energy and creativity and experience and courage. So how do we make that work? Well, I think we have to do something that maybe doesn't seem natural to us, and that is foster mutual honor between the generations. Scripture teaches two-way respect, right? Young people are told in 1 Timothy 4:12, let no one despise your youth, right? We understand that youth does not mean spiritual irrelevance, right? Young believers can lead through character. They can lead through this love that young people kind of just naturally exude to one another. They can lead through faith, and they can lead through purity. And then older believers are told gray hair is a crown of glory. That's from Proverbs 16:31. I don't know what it says about no hair, but it does say that gray hair is a crown of glory. I guess this is an advanced version. I don't know. But by the way, the back side of that verse is as important as the front side, because here's what it says on the end. It is gained in a righteous life. A few minutes ago we said that, age doesn't naturally equate, right, to wisdom. Hopefully it should. Hopefully through the years we're growing in Christ. Hopefully at our age, if we've been a member of the Lord's church for 30, 40 or more years, that we're not still drinking the milk, that we're into the meat and have been for a while. But gray hair is that crown of glory, and we gain that through living the way God wants us to live. See, age brings a unique thing to any conversation, and that's perspective. Perspective. Having been there, done that, gives us a perspective that our children, our grandchildren, those that we are mentoring, that they don't have. They lack that perspective because they have not been there. They have not experienced it. So our responsibility is to foster this relationship in such a way that when I can express this experience, when I can say, be careful with this, this is something you need to avoid, this is not pointing in the right direction, that relationship builds a measure of honor between us. I say it with love because I honor them, and they receive it with respect and honor because of that relationship. The older Christians carry stories of faithfulness, lessons learned the hard way. Yeah. We often say, I'm trying to tell you this. You don't have to experience everything in order to realize you don't need to do that. Learn from my mistakes. It's that type of, what we're trying to accomplish here is preventing those that we love, preventing those that we're trying to raise and to teach. We're preventing them from having to go through some of the experience that you and I have, some of the hardships. One of the ones that comes top of mind to me, and Terry and Taylor and Justin and I have all preached this lesson 1,000 times, and it's about making sure that you marry a godly person. And whether it happens in your own family or whether it happens with people at church, we understand. We had this conversation recently. It's not an impossibility for you to marry someone outside of Christ and to teach them the truth and convert them. What a beautiful thing that is. But that is the exception. That is not the rule. And our experience as children of God, our experience is maybe those who have not done it the right way, who've had to pay a tremendous price for that, can now Say to this young person that you love, don't make this huge mistake. You know, what we bring with us too as older folks is the evidence. We bring evidence to these young people that God sustains us over time, over the decades. We've got this song we've been singing for several months. It's called Goodness of God. And the line in that gets me every time is, all my life you have been faithful. I cannot say that in response to that song. When I sing that song, I'm saying that to God. God, all my life, you have been faithful to me. Because I cannot say that, God, all my life, I have been faithful to you. But you and I, what we bring to the table in this development of young people is we can show them the evidence that God can sustain you through difficult times. You don't have to go through it and lean on God through it. But if it happens, you have a God there who won't let you down. That is one of the most valuable conversations we could ever have with a young person. So, I wrap up that little section by saying this to you. The church, here's a word we don't use very often, the church needs these testimonies. Yeah? The church needs these experiences that you and I have been through to be verbalized. They need to be explained. They need to be taught. They need to be shared with young people. When that bell rings here in about 23 minutes, we're going to get a flood of people into this room and into the auditorium. All the way. That's our harvest right there. That's our field. That's our mission field outside of, inclusive of what we're trying to accomplish here. Every one of them that walk in this door, every one of them that we encounter today, that we see, these are people, these are young people who need our testimony of what God has done for us. Now, next section in this lesson talks about tensions. There are some common generational tensions that will happen. Now, what I've kind of talked about thus far is what our approach should be and why. But in that relationship building, in that coexisting in the Lord's church, because it's ever changing, right? Every day we're getting older, right? Here in a little while we're going to be celebrating the birth of coming up soon, a little Allison Grace, another baby coming in, right? So we got folks going out, we got people coming in, we got people getting older, their responsibilities are changing, their spiritual maturity is changing. So, man, this goes by fast. Right? This goes by fast. So we can't miss these moments. And we understand that there are tensions that are going to happen, but without love, these differences that we run into, they create misunderstanding and division. Here's some of the tensions that happen. Worship style preferences, technology use, cultural change, communication differences, leadership expectations. I mean, those can all be pretty weighty and heavy in and of themselves. You could literally have a class a week for each one of those. But when we look at those situations, worship style, technology use, cultural change, communication differences, leadership expectations, these differences either can divide us or it can enrich the church. You know what the deciding factor on that is? Love. Love. I want to kind of go over again, because it's super valuable to me, what each generation offers the Lord's church today. Us, older generations. We have the responsibility, but we also have the value of providing stability. We have a history of a long-term commitment. to God. We have, as long as we have our memory, we have a historical memory of things that have happened, of the development and the growth of the Lord's church over time. And what you and I really do have is we have a tested faith. Man, that is so powerful. We have a faith that has been likely at some point in time, or maybe multiple times in our life, shook. Where you feel like the ground underneath you is unstable, or maybe it's gone altogether. But you now bring to the table, to the church, a tested faith. Young generations provide a fresh set of eyes, fresh vision, cultural awareness. Now, the key there is cultural awareness, not necessarily demanded cultural adaptation, right? They bring an understanding better than us of what is the developing culture that we have in our community, in our country. And that brings a value, because if we bring the stability, then we can make sure that those two are handled properly. They also bring energy for ministry. And that's something that always has to be a relevant piece of what we're doing. There's got to be a great amount of energy invested or infused into what we're doing. And then what they also bring are new methods to outreach. One of the things I've tasked our evangelism team this year, our ministry, was to think outside the box of ways that we can get out in the community, right? To tell more people about Jesus through the Azalea City Church of Christ. So when generations listen to each other, when they work together, when there's this bond, this relationship, this honoring, this love for each other, this listening ear for each other, the church becomes stronger. I have experienced it both ways. I have experienced it in my life when those things didn't exist as God would have them to be. When the gap between the generations was so broad and there was no respect in either direction. The cause of Christ is jeopardized. And by the way, by doing that, it becomes sinful. So we have a grave responsibility here. So let's talk a minute about the danger of that age segregation. And it is modern culture that is the culprit, typically, for what often separates people by age. All right? But the church is meant to be different than that. Completely different than that. See, we understand, or we better understand, that segregation, it produces isolation, even within the church. And that is a terrible thing. That's a sad thing. It also creates misunderstanding. And in the context of this lesson, what it really produces is lost mentorship opportunities. These gaps, if we let them continue, if we are so against this idea of honoring each other and listening to each other and working together, then we're going to lose these opportunities. Listen, Samantha and I were talking with our son Aaron and his wife Stephanie yesterday on video chat, and one of the things that we kind of called out, they live in New Jersey and working in New York, so no thank you. What we called out is the reality of the world today that says that if we disagree, then we're enemies. Simple as that. You can't hardly disagree with anybody about anything hardly anymore, because nobody wants to talk about it. They just want to call you out and write you off. By the way, this is an incredible opportunity for the Lord's church to be an example to the world of how to do it differently, how to do it like God called us to do it. Listen, in this generational tug and pull that will happen, I mean, listen, these, even in the Lord's church, a perfect institution, this type of transitional relationship is not without stress and strain. You got to expect it. But what we also remember is, we're the mature ones in the room. Well, we better be the mature ones in the conversation, yeah? We need to be the ones to lead by being willing to listen. Even if our mind's already made up. I got to learn that in my life. Very oftentimes, I already know I'm right about something, in theory, and I just don't want to listen and listen and listen because I already know. But I have to be better about that. I got to listen. The relationship is what will help us get to the end goal that we're trying to reach with these folks. And if they feel respected and that they feel heard, even if you disagree with them, they've at least had the opportunity to be part of the conversation. Robert?
That's a fine line there because nowadays, a lot of these, if you have tolerance towards them, that means you accept what they say, even though you tell them you don't.
That means misunderstood, aren't they?
Well, even if you say it straight out plainly, I love you, I'll take care of you, but I do not accept your lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to think that if you don't come out all the time and talk against it, you come into this disagreement means you're my enemy. But if you don't talk about it against it enough, then they assume you accept it.
Yeah. And was it Galatians 4:16? Paul said to the church there, "Have I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth?" We have to have a different mindset. And listen, what we have to be, Robert, is crystal clear.
How much more crystal clear can you say that I do not accept?
Well, then bring Q-tips to the conversation, right? I mean, you control what you can control. But here's the other part. It's like anything in our relationships with people. It's about when we're trying to share the gospel with people. It's about, look, you bring care and love to the table. You bring truth to the table. You can't control what their response is to it.
Well, here's the trouble with that.
Okay?
Until they're willing to accept it and admit that they need to change, you're beating a dead horse, basically, because you just cannot. The hardest thing in the world to convince anybody of is somebody who is so set in their ways, and I'm talking about mental thought process, that they are absolutely right and you're absolutely wrong, and you cannot convince them otherwise.
I get where you're coming from, but I don't believe it's beating a dead horse because cultivating that dead horse is God's job and not mine. My job is to plant the seed of care and love. My job is to plant the seed of truth. My job is to plant the seed based on experience and reality and decades of whatever. At the end of the day, I don't want to be the guy that didn't say it because I had already gotten so much pushback. Y'all, I've said this story, told this story before, and I won't go into the length of it, but my father preached for 16 years, was treated so horribly by this congregation, and my dad spent the next 20 years taking it out on God. And I would have conversation after conversation after conversation with my dad. And there was one conversation that went very terribly, where he told me that he had forgotten more about the Bible than I will ever know. He was wrong.
Yeah, but your father, later on in his life, he changed because he learned to accept it.
Right. So for 20 years I wasn't beating a dead horse, Robert.
I know, you weren't beating a dead horse, but he had to change.
Agreed. And that's on them. My point is, if we struggle with generations in the church, sometimes we're going to have that person that's going to say, well, I think that's stupid, or that's just old-fashioned, or it's like, never heard that before. All right? So here's what you do. You say, I understand why you think that. I was 22 once also. I thought my parents were stupid also. We just have a job to do. Right? Ultimately, we just have a job to do. When we can interact regularly with the generations, then wisdom gets transferred. And it may bounce, but it gets transferred. Compassion deepens. And I believe faith multiplies, not just with that young person, but with me also. So here's some practical ways to love across generations. For the older members, invest intentionally in young believers. They need you. They need you. Share faith stories. Encourage questions from them. Invite the conversation. And then we need to avoid those dismissive attitudes towards change. Change must be vetted, right? What do we say coming out of the elder's office all the time? It must pass the Bible test. Yes, ma'am.
Go back to that first statement you started there.
Invest intentionally.
And then the next one?
Share faith stories. And then encourage questions from them.
It's what you said just right before that last sentence.
Avoid dismissive attitudes towards change.
There was something you said that just.
Oh, I don't know. With me, you never do. Okay.
Well, what you'll do is if you were to stand up against someone
Yep.
that had their mindset
Yep.
and they argued, that I'm right, if you
Yep.
didn't just listen to them, you would build a bridge,
Build a wall, for sure.
And like your dad, for instance, if you had stood up to him, yes, I do know as much as you do.
Yeah.
That would have been a wall, and he may have never.
And the approach changed too. I got to the point where the words were not making a difference. But I'm confident I know exactly what made the difference. There were two things. I prayed for him every day. And second of all, I tried to live my life to remind him of what he taught me to be. I became the example for him. And I did remind him from time to time, you taught me this. You left the legacy for me. So those are practical ways from the older person. Now, from the younger person, they're not in here, but here's what they need to understand. They need to seek mentorship. They need to understand that they do not know it all, and they do need guidance and wisdom from people who have been there, done that, got the t-shirt, right? They need to understand that it's great to ask for that wisdom. Ask for a little bit of input of how would you approach this situation. They also need to show respect. That is a trait that we need to back up a minute and buckle down on. I see even from time to time in the Lord's church the way some young people talk disrespectfully to older people, including their parents, and you might as well just be scratching a chalkboard. It gives me the all-overs. We need to be teaching that to our children and our grandchildren. And then they need to value the experiences of those of us who have, advanced to this point in our lives. See, love is expressed back and forth through the curiosity that we have, through the humility that should be shown on both sides, and the sharing that can exist. Let's talk for just a minute about the responsibilities of parents and grandparents. We know Deuteronomy chapter 6 through 9. God commands faith to be taught at home, daily, through conversation, through example. Faith is not meant to be outsourced to the church entirely. That is not just a youth minister's favorite sermon. It is 100% reality. The responsibility of the rearing of our grandchildren and our children is on us.
If you want to know how you're living your life, look at your kids.
Woo! That'll preach.
Well, also, it doesn't take a village to raise a kid. It takes two adults, a man and woman.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And listen, and what the church provides is this safe environment to supplement the godly parenting that is happening at home. So, as we wrap up, here's the power of this intergenerational friendship. I believe some of the strongest growth spiritually happens when these friendships, when these relationships cross age boundaries. Older believers gained a renewed enthusiasm, and younger believers gain grounded wisdom, and they need it. These friendships, these relationships reflect the family nature of the church. And by the way, that is something that will be foreign to many in the world, and they need to see that when they come to the Azalea City Church of Christ. They need to see this family nature of the church. They do. We're pretty good at it. But as we reflect, we should ask ourselves some questions. We do this every week. Some personal reflection, a little conclusion, and then I'm going to give you a challenge, okay? When was the last time I intentionally encouraged someone from another generation here at Azalea City? Am I learning from those older than me? Am I investing in someone younger than me? Do I treat generational differences as problems, or do I treat them as opportunities? See, neighbor love includes those who are decades ahead and behind us in life. I don't believe God ever intended his church to be divided by age. Instead, he designed the spiritual family where wisdom can flow downward, energy flows upward, and faith flows forward. Man, I wish I had written that. That was really cool. Wisdom flows downward, energy flows upward, faith flows forward. So when we love each other well as generations that are separated by age, I believe the church becomes a powerful testimony to the world. A needed testimony. So here's our challenge. Try to have a meaningful conversation with someone at least 20 years younger than you. When I wrote this, just so you know, no offense, I wrote 20 years older or 20 years younger. And some people may find it hard to find somebody that falls into that first one. But we should all be able to find somebody who is 20 years younger than us. Let's have a meaningful conversation. Let's ask about their faith journey, and maybe that you can tell them about yours. And let's listen carefully. Maybe our prayer, as we wrap up, our prayer should be, Lord, help me value every generation in your family. Yeah. Thank you. Let's get ready for worship.